If you're like most people, you've probably already used the new year as an opportunity to set some new goals or start some new habits. And if you're watching a video like this one, you've probably already done some Googling, or you've watched a bunch of other videos on how to set good goals, or 3 ways to make your habits stick, or how to make 2024 the best year of your life. And you're following the common sense advice. You've set some reasonable, reachable targets, you've focused on your individual effort rather than the outcomes of that effort, and you've picked habits that are tied to things that you actually care about. You're doing all of that, but you just can't make it happen. You can't make those new habits stick. Here's why. If you're trying to understand why you're acting a certain way, remember something that's called the law of effect. What's rewarded is repeated. What's punished is avoided. The law of effect is supported by modern neuroscience research, which has found that people move into action more rapidly when given a reward and inhibit action more effectively when threatened with punishment. Now, this takes us to an immediate problem. Many of the things we enjoy in the moment, and therefore experience as a reward, are not aligned with our long-term goals. And many of the things that do support our long-term goals can feel kind of like punishments. Think of common resolutions like exercising regularly or quitting a form of substance use, or even just reducing how much time you spend on your phone. These are all double whammies. You're trying to replace an enjoyable behavior like chilling on your phone with one that feels like a punishment, like exercising. No wonder it is so hard for us to stay on track. And this issue is just made worse by the hidden model that most people carry around about productivity itself. That it sucks, that it's uncomfortable and frustrating and really painful to have to consistently apply ourselves day after day after day. A huge part of the motivation for many people in becoming more efficient and effective is so they can spend less time doing the thing that they don't actually want to be doing. Or maybe they learn what are called distress tolerance skills so we can keep on doing the unpleasant thing for longer periods of time. Most of the questions that people have related to productivity and motivation and attaining their goals really just boil down to, how can I start or get more consistent with doing this thing I don't actually want to be doing? And that's the wrong question. That question dooms us. The right question is, how can I make this something I actually want to do? Most of the time, this means going out of our way to hunt for the reward, or to put it simply, to make it more enjoyable. And we can do this 2 different ways. First, we can learn how to identify what's already enjoyable about whatever it is that we're doing. And then second, we can go out of our way to deliberately make the thing more enjoyable. Now, learning how to do this means coming face to face with one of the brain's most problematic and difficult features to deal with, the negativity bias. Our experiences are made up of many different parts. Think of drinking a cup of coffee or, tea if that's your preference. There's the warmth of the cup, there's the texture of it, the feeling of it against your lips, the movement of the liquid in your mouth, the flavor, the ways the flavor changes over time, and all of these other things, right? In addition to all of those different feelings in the body, there are all of the associations that you have with that activity. The model that you carry around of yourself as a coffee drinker, the link you feel between drinking coffee and going to work, the memories of other times you drank coffee. Now, some of those parts are enjoyable, and some of them might not be, but they're all just going on in the background all of the time. But we can break those parts into 2 categories. The first is what I'll call category A. These are the parts that are directly in our experience without us needing to focus on. Then there's category B, and these are the parts that we can call up into our experience by deliberately focusing on them. Now, when I drink a cup of coffee, I usually don't really notice the feeling of my hand against the cup, or the weight of it as I bring it to my mouth, or the flow of it over my tongue, right? I mostly notice temperature, taste, and smell. Out of the hundreds, if not thousands of different parts that made up the experience, only a tiny fraction of them ended up falling into category A. And it is so important to realize that this is true of every single experience, which means that an enormous variable in our overall happiness is how the brain chooses to allocate its attention. In other words, what ends up being a category A part, and why does the brain pick some parts over others? So how does this work? Your brain highlights the aspects of your experience that align with its core goals. Those goals are keeping you alive, conserving energy, and passing on gene copies. In other words, having sex. It's important to notice that happiness and fulfillment and all of those other positive emotions that we think of as being so important do not make the list. The brain's evolutionary emphasis on surviving to pass on genes is one of the reasons it has a negativity bias. It attends to, it learns from, and it uses negative information far more than positive information. Now, the prioritization of negative information has a lot of adaptive advantages, particularly when it came to keeping our distant ancestors alive in the harsh environments that they had to survive. Pursuing rewards like food or sex were, yes, important, but it was much more important to avoid potential consequences. If you don't get some kind of a reward today, you might get one tomorrow. But if you fail to avoid a major consequence, it could just be game over. So as a result, what does your brain do? It routinely scans for bad news. It focuses tightly on it, losing sight of the bigger picture. It overreacts to it. It then fast tracks that information into your emotional, somatic, and social memory. And then it becomes sensitized through repeated doses of the stress hormone cortisol. So it becomes even more reactive to negative experiences. And this creates a vicious cycle. More cortisol leads to more reactivity, which leads to more cortisol. To quote Rick Hanson, a clinical psychologist, and hey, my dad, the brain is like Velcro for bad experiences and Teflon for good ones. During a normal day, hundreds of things happen to us, most of which range from neutral to a little positive. Enjoyable experiences like getting something done at home or at work, getting into bed with a book at night, planning for something you're looking forward to, maybe leaning into something new, having a pleasant interaction with a coworker. We could just keep on going here, right? That good cup of coffee. All these things happen to us all the time. But what do we think about when we're lying awake at night? It's probably that one asshole who cut you off in traffic. And you can see this just in real time if you take a close look at your mind. In the flow of experience with all of its many parts, what does the brain put into category A? For most people, it's the negative stuff. So what does this mean for achieving our goals and creating new habits? Now, most evidence-based approaches to therapy have similar goals. A few of the major ones include learning how to get some separation from the flow of thoughts through the mind. So we see ourselves as having thoughts rather than being thoughts. We also learn which thoughts tend to lead to more suffering and which ones don't. We learn ways to get beneath the thought, which means identifying the source material that created it. And seeing that source material often helps people understand its context, which then allows us to create new thoughts or disidentify from our current ones. Then, really importantly, we learn attentional control, which gives us the ability to deliberately lean into some thoughts and away from others. Now, if you've been listening to my podcast Being Well for a while, you probably already know that these are some of the goals of mindfulness practice as well. The word mindfulness itself comes from the Pali word sati, which can be translated more directly as memory or recollectedness. And I really love thinking of mindfulness as a kind of remembering, where we're deliberately recalling the whole of our experience without being so captured by any one part of it. Now, forgetting is normal. Growth isn't about not forgetting, it's by shortening the time it takes to remember. Remembering the parts of an experience that are more fulfilling or useful or enjoyable is what allows us to pursue it more consistently. And that's where you get to the value here for goals and hobbies and pursuits and building the habits that really matter to you. So let's use a common goal, exercising more regularly, as an example. For most people, here's the framework of that goal in terms of what we've learned so far. With the law of effect, we're trying to replace time relaxing, that's reward, with time expending effort, that's a punishment. Then in terms of the negativity bias, the painful aspects of exercising, physical discomfort, fatigue, whatever else that you don't like that's going on in your body, is pushed up into category A. And then we've got some loose thoughts going on because we have a lack of attentional control. When we add on to that pain and discomfort, that creates difficult thoughts and emotions like anxiety, shame, and so on. Self-criticism tends to rise up to the top of the mind. Now, I want to take a moment here to highlight that this framework isn't totally wrong, which is why it's so compelling. Our experience is made up of many parts, and some of those parts are painful, but plenty of other parts exist too. And one of the ways to tell that you've fallen into the brain's traps is if you feel a rigid attachment to things being exactly one way and no other way. Exercise is punishment, it is uncomfortable, and I will hate it if I do it. This is sometimes known as splitting, or more commonly as black and white thinking, and it's one of the many tools that the brain uses to conserve energy and keep us safe from harm. In this particular case, it's also getting in the way of our goals. One of the most useful questions we can ask when working with the mind is what is also true. So let's take a look here. Using myself as an example, I used to dislike moving my body. I was an awkward kid. I had a lot of self-consciousness about how I looked. I had absolutely brutal acne, and I was bullied and teased regularly during class in general and gym class in particular. Now, toward the end of high school, my sister asked me if I wanted to take a dance class, and this sounded like an awful idea and also like something that would probably be good for me. So I gulped, and I ended up making one of the better decisions of my teen years by saying yes. Now, I was bad. I was really bad. I was not a natural. I was awkward and uncomfortable. I found it easy to lapse into intense self-criticism. My body hurt. I didn't know what to do. And as somebody who, at that moment in time, had made a huge part of their identity being the one who knows, this was not my idea of a fun time. But amidst all of that, there were all of these other things that were true too. Moving itself just felt good. There was a feeling of release in it. I didn't really have the words for it back then, but with a little bit more knowledge about psychology, it felt almost like my character armor were breaking down in useful ways, like I had gotten trapped in these ways of holding the body and defending myself that just weren't good for me anymore. They weren't useful. They didn't support what I really cared about. And dancing really helped with that. And as I stuck with it, two really incredible experiences began to appear more regularly. First, I started feeling more competent, which made going to the studio more enjoyable for starters. And it also unlocked some of my natural intrinsic motivation, which is an idea from self-determination theory. Now, second, and far more importantly, I was proud of myself. That felt great. Now, regardless of the goal you're pursuing, some aspects of it are going to be painful, and some won't. Beyond the suffering that the brain is incentivized to highlight, what else is true? What are the aspects of this activity that you can authentically enjoy? Does it bring you closer to goals that would feel amazing to achieve? How could you deliberately nudge your thoughts toward those more enjoyable aspects and away from the ones that are less productive for you? And this might be kind of edgy for some people, but is there a part of you that's more supportive or nurturing in addition to whatever parts are more shaming and self-critical? So I've used a lot of words here. So let's really simplify things down to what really matters if you're trying to achieve a goal or build a new habit. Over and over and over again, look for what there is to enjoy. Make a habit of looking for enjoyment. Look for the aspects of experience that are rewarding while you're doing the things that matter to you. Do not let yourself be a prisoner to your brain's whims. You are driving the bus here. And when you find something to enjoy, marinate in it. It is weirdly common for people to be so prudish and self-conscious about enjoyment and enthusiasm and actually finding the fun in life. We've made it cool to be kind of disenchanted and disengaged. When you find fun, when you find the enjoyment, oh my God, feel that experience fully. Hang out in it. Stick with it. Really feel into any pleasant body sensations that accompany it. I'm going to slow this down because this is important. If it makes it more enjoyable for you to jump up and down after doing something and give yourself a high five and roll around on the ground or engage in some other unbelievably cringe behavior or what you think is unbelievably cringe behavior, do it. Do it. Like, who the cares about how other people perceive you? Life is too short. Along similar lines, find a way in that works for you. People often take bites that are way too big, and then they get mad at themselves when they have a hard time chewing. Returning to our exercising example, some people are just never going to go to the gym consistently. That's the way it is. It takes too much time, it costs them too much money, and it's too painful in other ways. There's just too much friction for them to realistically succeed. And then they'll get mad at themselves about being unable to exercise because they can't go to the gym. They're asking the wrong question. What's a much simpler, much easier version of this thing that you really could commit to? How can you make it too easy to fail? Now, let's say you do all of this. You're pursuing a meaningful goal, you've found some ways to make it digestible, and you've gotten to a point where taking the actions needed to achieve that goal feel pretty good to you. If one day you still find yourself stuck in a pattern of frustration or self-criticism, it's probably time to just take a break. At that point, you're just practicing suffering, and you're tying that suffering to the activity through repetition. You're going to make yourself dislike it more in the future by keeping on going today. Just put the stone down. Let it go. It'll still be there tomorrow. It's time to take a break. Being able to notice the flow of experience with all of its many parts is already an incredibly useful skill for life. And being able to deliberately focus on the enjoyable aspects of our experience, highlighting them in our minds, is even more useful. But you might be listening to this and think, wow, this seems really simple, right? It seems simple because it is simple. Most complicated advice that you get is not going to be useful. It's not actionable. It might work if your whole life is about achieving a goal or if you have an enormous amount of free time for some reason. But for most people, they need a basic principle that they can apply over and over again to whatever new skill it is that they want to build. And also, it's really helpful because if you truly can't find something enjoyable about this new habit, if you can't find anything, that's a great sign that you're pursuing something because you think you should, not because you actually care about it. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I'd love to hear down in the comments what you thought about it. And as a reminder, there are new episodes of my podcast, Being Well, every Monday right here on this channel. And you can listen wherever you get your podcasts. That's it for today, and I'll talk to you soon.